Welcome to Come and See, your podcast for finding truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. With host and founder Richard Case and co-host and retreat leader Kathy Ricconi. Jesus reminds us to watch for the signs of his return. Today we will explore further what we are seeing in our times that line up with what signs he said would indicate the potential of the end and his return. We will also discuss the practical meaning of this as we watch and as a remnant prepare as he so leads. And now your host, Richard Case.
Good morning, everybody. This is End Times Friday, and we have our continued special guests with Rabbi Ephraim and Eric and Denny, and we're had so much to talk about last time about Israel that we wanted to continue this discussion because we didn't get to everything, and it's so important to what is happening. And so, thank you both for joining us. Ephraim is on vacation, and you're in North America, right?
Yeah, I'm in Canada, just north of the United States.
How's your kids enjoying Canada?
Love it. Yeah, we also like that it's a few degrees cooler than Israel in the summer.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you, the last time we were with you there was you were going to go experience your bar mitzvah for your son. How did that go?
That's right. It was spectacular. It was great. We did, the whole family was there, and we did a lot of meals together. And in the synagogue, he read from the Torah. He did a beautiful job, and he had a blast. And this is a beautiful family and friends get together extravaganza. It would be a beautiful send up. So his big birthday present was going today to Six Flags with a couple of his brothers.
Oh, that's great.
How did he do in his speech?
Actually, spectacular. And I'm not usually a big fan of bar mitzvahs. Very often the kids are trained to do super complicated speeches that no one listens to. And he did something that he prepared with one of his older brothers, and it was really meaningful and interesting based on the wisdom of the Torah's portion.
That's great.
For that week. Yeah.
Oh, that is terrific. Well, that's great, and glad you did. Eric, how about any news from your relative over in St. Louis that had the bombing?
The police department stopped their 20, but they got some assistance from the security department at Washington University, so that helped.
Well, that's something. How's he doing?
Like 4 days, so we got power again. But I think he's fine.
Great. Well, we want to pick up, where we were last time. We were, having conversations about Gaza and the hostage situation there, and then at the plans of Israel of what they're planning on doing in Gaza. So let's start with that. What's the latest? What we've heard over here is that I guess you had a vote in the Knesset or a discussion in the Knesset, and there was some things that they're planning on doing. What are they planning on doing? What do you see the impact of that?
There's not a lot talked about publicly about the subject. There's a vote in the Security Cabinet, and the overwhelming majority voted in favor of pursuing the next stage of this war with Hamas, which would the entry into Gaza City for the first time. The army is done. And the controversy within the country is primarily revolving around the status of the hostages. Doing this maneuver will risk the lives of the hostages. But I think that the right way to read this is the government has sort of reached its wit's end. The way to get Hamas to the negotiating table to terms that seem reasonable to the United States. And I think, Qatar's recently gotten very frustrated with the Hamas for its rather extreme position. And so I think the feeling within much of the government is that get the hostages back, other than pursuing this highly risky approach. Nonetheless, there are a lot of, I don't know, maybe it's hard to really know the number, but a large fraction of the population, I would not say necessarily a majority, but a large, are against this maneuver because of the hostages. And here's my off-the-cuff assessment. It's not going to be very flattering to Israelis, but you get 5 Israelis in a room, you get 20 opinions. And everybody knows better than the government and the people involved in negotiations how to negotiate this country out of this situation. So everybody knows everything in this country. The reality is no one knows anything. The reality is that there are probably 20 people in the entire country who really know all the issues and all the issues discussed in these negotiations and exactly where things stand and what can and can't be done with Hamas at this stage. I mean, everyone's an expert in this country, and everyone's going around protesting and saying, well, let's just, reach a deal, get all the hostages back, and then Hamas will do something, we can attack again. And I think most people who have been involved in it's not the reality of the situation, and so that's my off-the-cuff assessment. So right now, literally what we are is we're like 2 weeks into a 2-month period, during which the Army is supposed to be preparing to go into Gaza. We wanted the Army to go in like now, and the Army responded saying, we can't do it now. We need time to prepare. We need to call up the reservists once again, and we need to do this properly and organized, and we can't do this just like immediately. So the government told the Army, okay, take your time and start getting ready, but we're going in. And Europe's having a conniption. All the European leaders, they know 20 times better than an Israeli what to do. All these European leaders, they know exactly how the negotiations are going. They've been involved in the negotiations, and they're busy telling us what to do. In the meantime, they decided to go recognize the Palestinian state, not because they believe that's the right thing to do, because that's the only way they can figure out how to show the fact that they're upset with government here in Israel. Because they know better than anyone else what to do with Gaza and Hamas. That's a bit of sarcasm, excuse me, but I think that's the reality. I mean, none of these people know. I mean, there are people in the U.S. administration who know the real deal. Steve Witkoff, President Trump, and the group of advisors around them, and some of the Egyptians who've been involved in negotiations, the Qataris, even Qatar, which is the main benefactor behind Hamas, is getting frustrated with them. But yet everybody knows, President Macron of France, he knows what's best for Israel and best for the situation of the hostages, and so does, Prime Minister Starmer from the UK, and of course the Prime Minister from Canada, who's infinitely wise in all these issues.
Yeah, we'll come back to that about, the two-state stuff that they're proposing. Rabbi, from the populist point of view, what's the reaction to the thought that you're going to go back in now and occupy Gaza?
Yeah. So I will say that from the beginning of the war, the hostage, what's known as the hostage forum, sort of the ad hoc informal representatives of the hostage families, was taken over very, very quickly by the left-wing parties of Israel. The same people that were fighting against judicial reform just reorganized their posters, same streets, same protests, same anti-Bibi Netanyahu, but now it was branded under a new slogan, which was "Free the Hostages." And of course, everyone's all for that. Who can be opposed to getting out there and expressing the pain of the nation and calling for the freedom of the hostages. But sooner or later, that has turned into, or that has been colored by a left-wing agenda. And so the government at the beginning of the war, after October 7th, set 2 main priorities for the war. One was to get the hostages all back, and 2 was to remove Hamas from power, disarm them, make sure that they are never a threat and will not do another October, which they were completely 100% committed to doing again. What's become clear, I think, to a lot of Israelis is that those are not necessary. They don't go hand in hand, and you're not necessarily going to accomplish both. And you might have to sacrifice one or the other. And I think, this is just my opinion, that the government's move now is saying we cannot have the whole country being held hostage indefinitely. It's already a long time into the war because of 20 live hostages, because Hamas is not willing to negotiate. Israel has tried everything to negotiate. And so now they're just saying we have to try and get them out by force and try and end this conflict and end this war and remove Hamas from power. So the people that were representing the hostages, they don't like that. And no one likes it. No one likes it because this is putting the hostages at risk. But you have to make a really, really painful decision here. Do you risk the hostages in order to free the country and have a safe, secure country for 10 million people who are living in Israel and hopefully deal with the root problem of Hamas? So the hostage forum is now super charged to not do that. And they're going out to the streets en masse to protest any move which will endanger the hostages. So at this point, the country, it's hard to know exactly, and the government isn't being very clear and explicit about exactly what they have planned and why. But you sort of have this very big split in the country now where some people are saying we got to finish off Hamas, and, it may be unfortunate and tragic for the remaining hostages. And half the country is saying, no, hostages come first, and we just have to try and capitulate to whatever Hamas demands from us in order to create a ceasefire. Of course, the Israeli government says, we even tried that. There's only so far we can capitulate. We tried to capitulate to Hamas in the negotiations a lot, but there's certain red lines that we cannot go. So the country is very, very split. There's a lot of frustration, anger, and fear going on all over the place,
Sure.
And confusion.
Based on if they are going to occupy it, what do you predict will happen relative to will Hamas be completely removed, one, and two is what will then happen to the country itself since it's in ruins? What will be the potential of rebuilding or reestablishing a different, nation there operationally? So what's both of your thoughts about what might happen here if they go in and occupy?
So if I go first, let me make one sort of correction. There's really, except for a fringe part of the country, very small minority on the very far right, there's no one talking about occupying Gaza, okay? Meaning in the sense that there's going to be Israeli civilians living in towns and villages in Gaza. There's no talk of that except for a very fringe element.
Okay.
What's being talked about is sort of a military takeover of large, not even the entire Gaza, but probably right now we're sitting around 70%, and they're probably going to take it up to 80 to 85% in terms of land territory, for the purpose of eliminating the remainders of Hamas's 2,000 or so fighters and blowing up the rest of the tunnels and their infrastructure, hopefully recovering the hostages, but we'll see. And so that's what's being talked about. And so then your other question was kind of along, well, Gaza's pretty demolished, so what happens after? The reality is that the government and the Prime Minister tried to explain this recently in a press conference that was held in English to the foreign press, that the reality is that there's going to be no foreign entity that's going to put up the money, maybe with the exception of Qatar. No one's going to put the money to try to rebuild Gaza if Hamas is ruling Gaza. And the simple reason is because everybody knows that Hamas is still in charge, still has arms. They're going to attack Israel again, and then Israel's going to come back in and do exactly what it just did. So why would anyone in the right mind put money into, it's the worst investment you can imagine. You're going to invest in creating, rebuilding Gaza, knowing full well that probably within a period of 3 to 7 years, the IDF is going to come back and and demolish it once again because there'll be another attack. So no one, including Saudi Arabia or anyone that's got any head on their shoulders, is going to put money back into recreating Gaza, knowing this situation. Hamas has said, okay, well, we're going to turn over civilian control or administration to another entity, but we're going to keep our arms, keep our army. We're going to continue fighting because it's an armed insurrection. So this is the dilemma that the world, it's not just an Israeli problem. It's a regional problem, and I think the people in Egypt and Saudi Arabia, they know this. They know this full well, and sort of course, is the United States, and probably most leaders in Europe. If you ask them in private, they would say, yeah, we understand that's the situation, but they're not going to say that publicly because they'll have a population that's going to throw rocks and blow buildings up in Paris, and so they go ahead and go to New York and vote for a Palestinian state. So this is the dilemma. And so that's one reason why the government says our position is Hamas has to lay down its arms. We don't need to kill them all, but you need to lay down your arms and you need to leave. Now, the reality is that Hamas is also an idea, and it's a very ugly idea for most Western minds. But they seem to distort many young Americans on campuses right now, because it's really the Muslim Brotherhood. And the Muslim Brotherhood has a vision. That vision is that ultimately the entire world is one big caliphate.
Yeah.
And the entire world is converted to Islam, forcibly. And one way to accomplish that is we just, send many Muslims to Europe and North America, and their population grows either by more immigration or naturally. And eventually we're large enough that we do it. And this is happening very clearly in Europe and largely in Canada. I'm sure Ryan can talk about that more than I can. And so you're not going to kill that idea. That idea is going to outlast Hamas even. And so that's just an ongoing battle that the West has to be prepared to deal with, or in some parts of the West, they're capitulating. This is my view.
Yes.
Ryan?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, Eric, and I think that it cuts to the chase, and this is what a lot of Western minds and journalists and media and politicians fail to recognize and speak out about, that this has nothing to do with the Palestinian state. This is radical Islam. It's their ongoing effort to take over the world for Islam. And Israel has the unfortunate luck of being a Western democracy sitting with its borders, in the middle of the Middle East, surrounded by Muslims and Arabs who hate the West. So we're just like the front line of this battle. But if they were to get a Palestinian state, that's not going to change a thing. They're still out for destroying Israel. It'll just give them more ability to continue their destruction of Israel, give them the means to do it. So creating a Palestinian state is going to do absolutely, it will do a lot. It will make the situation much worse for the West. It will create a massive defeat for Western culture, for the Christian world, for the democratic world. And that's why the Muslims and the Hamas are so desperate for this victory. They're tasting a little piece of victory, and then they get backed up by European leaders and Canadian leaders and most of the world and all the journalists who just churn out Hamas's lies in their newspapers every day. So it's really important, because most people are under this false illusion that if we just gave the Muslim Arabs a Palestinian state, everything would be quiet, which is just pure nonsense. And that's something that almost every Israeli understands very clearly today, and which is why a Palestinian state is absolutely not in the cards. As much as any European or Canadian leaders will call for it, it's just never going to happen. Because what Israelis understand is a Palestinian state means suicide for us and our children and our parents and our cousins, and we're just not willing to allow them to kill us.
Yeah. So
we've done that too many times in history.
If I could summarize what I think we've heard, is that Israel's military movement back in is strictly geared toward not settling that area at all, but rather just preventing Hamas from gathering enough strength to reattack, and they'll focus on that, number one. And then two is because of that, and there's nobody willing to make investment there, including the Palestinians, that it's just going to be a country that lives in ruins, and not much progress is going to be made there, at least for a while. Is that a fair statement, or have I missed something at all in what you guys have said?
No, I think you're correct. Yeah, I don't think I have anything to correct or modify in any significant way. The honest truth is that on the assumption that we can reach the point where Hamas's control, and let me elaborate on something. Control just doesn't mean controlling arms and controlling, it also means controlling the population. And there's this tug of war going on because the Hamas's authority has been degraded so much. And there's, your listeners may have heard about this thing called the Gaza Humanitarian Fund. It's a humanitarian NGO established to distribute aid in Gaza. And it's being funded and supported by both the United States and Israel. And it's actually, within a matter of about 2 months, with some hiccups along the way, is now managing to feed about half of the Gaza population. And Ambassador Huckabee and negotiator Steve Witkoff's recent visit to the area, there's now talk of expanding the budget and the staffing of the GHF organization so it can start feeding most of the population. And Hamas is doing whatever it can, including firing and killing its own population, in order to try to stop this group from succeeding. And the reason is that they have total control over their population. If they're in charge of the aid, which they have been for most of this war, and they have all the guns, and they're the ones getting all the money, they maintain control, okay? And so it's not just control of territory, it's also control of the population. And Israel is doing what it can to erode that. And that's part of the reason why you hear about these casualty figures that have been taking place in Gaza, because, when one authority is diminished in its capacity and another authority hasn't emerged to take over from it in a very clear way, a bit of chaos ensues. And this is a bit of what's going on right now in Gaza in terms of aid. Nonetheless, there are over 800 to 1,000 truckloads of aid sitting inside Gaza waiting for distribution. Humanitarian organizations who are feeding the other half of the population have been refusing to distribute it because they claim it's not secure, because 80% of the trucks that pick up the aid from within Gaza, not across the border, from within Gaza, and take them to the areas where the population are being hijacked. Some hijacked by Hamas men, some hijacked by just local clans who happen to have arms. And because he who holds the aid, he gets resold on the market.
Yeah.
Here you have countries like United Arab Emirates and the United States and Jordan and other countries who are literally funding this aid program for free. It's free to the Gazan population. There's no one charging for all this aid that's going in, but I would call them bandits, either in the form of Hamas or others, are actually stealing this aid and reselling it to the Gazan population. And they take this money. I mean, it's really an abnormal situation. Some of it's perpetrated by Hamas, but some of it's perpetrated by other gangs.
So one thing you're saying, which is interesting, that if Israel's troops go back in and kind of take, let's say, the ability to execute certain things, they actually, if they're successful, will free up the aid.
Well, that's what's been going on now, and that's why you hear all these negative comments about this GHF organization. Why? Because it threatens the UN organizations. Because the UN organizations are basically maybe incompetent is not the right word, but they certainly are in collaboration with Hamas. Okay, for all kinds of reasons. As I posted on in my Substack, if you're inside Hamas and you're either a Gazan citizen, or you're a journalist, or you're an aid worker, except for the GHF organization, either you work for Hamas and are literally paid by them, or you sympathize with Hamas, or you're intimidated by them because they'll threaten your family. So if you're most of the aid is distributed by other Gazans who are paid by these UN organizations to do it. There are very few foreigners in Gaza at the moment. Okay, I don't know. They're probably less than 50. Okay, I don't know for a fact, but I'd be surprised if it's over 100. So when you hear about people, the aid workers being killed, these are other Gazans who have been contracted to help in the aid distribution. Okay, and so all those people who are distributing this aid, again, they're either paid by Hamas, or they're sympathizing with Hamas, or they're intimidated by Hamas. Yeah. There's no other fourth category. Those are the three categories that you're in. One of the three.
Yeah. Rabbi, do you have anything else you want to add to the, think of what's going to happen?
Yeah, well, I just want to add to Eric that that's the whole reason for the headlines in the last few weeks of the starvation in Gaza is just the orchestrated message coming from Hamas, because Hamas is so desperate to maintain control, so they need to sabotage the alternative effort which is being made by the United States and Israel. How can they sabotage that effort? By claiming that the entire population is starving and that the Israelis are killing people that are trying to get to the aid. It's all completely fabricated. I mean, there's a tiny kernel of truth. There are some people who are hungry, but there's virtually no starvation, and the people being killed are mostly by Hamas. But because of all the messaging is all being controlled by Hamas, you have the instant headlines in the New York Times and every other place that says that they're all starving to death. It's just a propaganda tool of Hamas for them to maintain control of the aid. Because he who controls the aid controls Gaza, which is why Israel is so determined to change the situation. Yeah. And in terms of the future, with the day after in Gaza, that's obviously a long story, but nothing can happen until Hamas is removed, because no one is willing to step up and take any type of leadership, because if they even so much as express any type of interest in that or take any moves, they'll just be killed by Hamas instantly. They all know that. So no one is willing to make any moves on any type of new leadership until Hamas is removed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that understanding. And it'll be interesting to watch here in the next, because the next time we talk, maybe in 3 or 4 weeks, a lot will have happened about that to see as it progresses, which is, again, this is always hard for us to fathom. But Israel actually, with their heart, is desiring to take care of those people, and they have to go in with military to be able to actually have those people being taken care of, and that's their heart. And why the world doesn't see that is beyond us. But you talk about the propaganda and people willing to receive that propaganda, and thank you for sharing this truth. We're going to have you back for our next week we got to discuss a little bit about Lebanon, and then we hear some things going on with Iran and the economy there and the population. And then we do want to take a little bit about the two-state solution. So thank you, Scott. Thank you guys so much. It's really a blessing to us that we have people inside that can tell us actually what's going on. And we just ask our audience to really consider it and keep, looking at Eric's Substack and be informed about what's really, and help other people see the truth of that. So thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. And to our audience, if you have questions from today's broadcast, send them in to us at questions@abideministries.com. We'll see you next time.
Yep, we'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us for today's episode of Come and See, your podcast for truth in a world of chaos. Brought to you by Living Waters Abide Ministries. Send us your questions and comments, and tune in tomorrow for more answers to your personal questions about living life in God's truth. Remember, God's will is best and none better. His truth brings peace in this world of chaos.